And we're live.
Are we?
We are indeed.
Okay, maybe that off-air icon will go away soon. What are we here to do today, Draco?
Well, Taurus, we're here today to discuss Star Wars and why we love Star Wars.
Why indeed? And we have a special guest today. The one, the only PorgLord is with us. Well,
Hello.
thanks for joining us, PorgLord. So, Draco, why don't you get that? I can't get over that name. I can't decide if that's the worst or the greatest name of all time.
Well, if he's Lord of the Porgs, he should own it, honestly. I've wrote up a little bit of an outline to try to keep this organized. Of course, we're talking about Star Wars today. I would like to start with how we were each introduced with Star Wars. Porg Lord, would you like to start?
I can. I guess, as a kid, watching the original trilogies, on TV was my first introduction to them. Grew up loving them. As I grew older, I started reading more of I guess now it's considered the old EU. Just fell in love with the story and the characters. Just started following it from there.
Taurus, would you like to give us the breakdown of how you were first introduced to Star Wars?
All I can do is think about where it is now and weep openly. But I same story, man. I grew up watching those. I don't know if they were on VHS, like if we had them, because I mean, I remember my first memories. I mean, I was born in '81, so I wasn't watching them in theaters. But I mean, I remember watching these things from the youngest of ages, and just like it's the one franchise that has truly stuck with me. And you had that huge gap between ROTJ and then the Phantom Menace, and so it just became legendary in that space. And so I wasn't into the EU. I'm a completionist, and by the time I really started getting into that kind of thing, there were already 600 books out. I was like, forget a bunch of this. But so I wasn't as much into the EU, although I have studied some of it and I kind of know where the story went. Um, but then the prequels, of course, came out, and so I was able to go see those in theaters for the first time. And while they are not perfect movies by any means, they are poorly executed, especially the first two. But they added to the lore, and it was something I could actually. I mean, I was probably 17 when they hit theaters, so I was able to drive and go see those on my own. So that holds a special weight to me. So the prequels are kind of like my generation. As bad as the execution was, I still love the story. You know, Luke destroying the Death Star, um, the hyperspace runs, so many iconic things from that series that I grew up with. It's been a huge part of my life, and that's kind of where I am as of when George Lucas sold it. That's where I was.
Gotcha. I actually didn't. I never saw Star Wars until I was maybe 10 or 11. It was my first experience with Star Wars. Before that, I'd had some Star Trek, but my first experience was my father going, "Hey, these movies, they're great. They were way ahead of their time," and that was about all he had to say about that, was that they were ahead of their time. Of course, me, I found a lot more to enjoy in the story, in the hero's journey, and the farm kid from nowhere who gets thrown into an adventure beyond his control. I mean, it was a very important time for me because I was just discovering The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings at the same time. So for me, my horizons were just exploding into the distance with the concept of bigger worlds and myth and wonder. And Star Wars came to be quite a bit. It came to mean a lot in those areas, in those dimensions for me. It came to be, for someone who was kind of socially awkward. It came to be kind of almost a club card, a members card. So, what are you interested in? Reading, movies. You ever seen Star Wars? Yeah, I've seen Star Wars. I love Star Wars. And instantly you're a friend with someone. You could have never known the person, but if you like Star Wars, well, you're cool enough for me to talk to.
Yeah, agreed. Um, First thing, you're still socially awkward, and secondly, um, that was supposed to be a joke. I didn't get any. Now I get a courtesy laugh. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
but you were talking about the hero's journey,
Hmm.
and that's kind of become a trope today. The hero's journey. There's a lot of people who rip that off, and kind of redo Star Wars in their own way. But why do you think Star Wars in itself, like the OT, holds up so well despite the fact that it's been done and done and done again?
Pork, would you like to?
Well, I think some of it is just because, in a way, that was, a new, at least in my mind, like kind of like a new venue for that story. I mean, it is a story that's been told throughout time, but, it's the first time visually, at least for me, that you get to see it in kind of that sci-fi setting in a movie, and a visually appealing movie, I guess I should say. Um, Whereas before you didn't necessarily get to see that, or if you did, I mean, at least for me as a kid growing up, you see some of the older stuff and it's just like, there's just the graphics or the visuals were just so cheesy. You shake your head, and it's very hard to, put yourself, have that suspended disbelief. It's you see it's just cardboard cutouts of stuff, and you can't do that. It's too jarring.
Kind of like watching the original Star Trek series.
In a way, yeah.
But hey, it at least has comedic value.
True.
Yeah, I think he's right though, because you watch that today. Um, Now, I haven't watched an original copy of Star Wars probably since the '90s. I've been polluted by the remasters and the Blu-rays, but even so, it still was so breathtaking to watch those. They were believable space battles, and they were so far ahead of anything within a decade, I would say.
Well,
Draco?
I'd agree with that. I know that when I was first being exposed to Star Wars, when had my first viewing, I was told it was kind of like a Western in space. And the reason why they told me it was a Western in space, I believe, is because at least in American media, American cinema, Westerns were the only place where you had the hero's journey. You had the farmer who would stand up to the outlaws and probably would get beat down, but then some grizzled old timer would take him aside and train him up and bring him back to defeat the bad guys, run him out of town. So you've had the hero's journey in many different versions in many different media over time, but like Porg said, this is the first time that you ever had the hero's journey set in space. Sci-fi was such a niche market when this first came out. There was an article that came out just a few days ago where apparently one of the producers of the UK show Doctor Who, when he had first seen Star Wars, his immediate first reaction was, "We're doomed. We're out of business. We're not going to be able to keep up," because it was such a niche market. They didn't have the viewers to support a whole lot of different shows. Fortunately, both Star Wars and Doctor Who were able to coexist because they each found their own niche within the sci-fi genre.
But you know what else is interesting about Star Wars is that it's really one of the only franchises. I know there's a couple others that really blends fantasy and sci-fi well. You do have the whole force part of it is a religious mystical experience. It's magic in a way. I mean,
Until you introduce Metachlorians.
You're
man,
getting ahead of yourself there.
I'm glad this is a remote broadcast. Yes, until you introduce midichlorians. But I joke a lot about I won't read or watch anything that doesn't have either a spaceship or a wizard in it, and that has both. I mean, you've got some iconic starships. I mean, Star Destroyers, the Millennium Falcon, X-wings, all of that, and then you have the Force. You have these mystical wizards. ObiWan. Who is this guy? What is the Force? Luke's journey to find out who he is within the Force, and then of course you meet Yoda, who's the Grand Master of all of it, and it's got such a mystical quality to it. And if you think that like the OT wasn't the mystical part of it was kind of subdued. It was very tastefully done. It wasn't until the prequels that it's really over the top and you have all these Jedi, but it was just a tasteful blend for me of fantasy and sci-fi.
Well, I'd agree with that. The mixture of fantasy with the science fiction in the Star Wars original trilogy was not very obsessive. It wasn't very um, uh, offensive in any way. It's not like someone came over the head and said, this is how the world is," and it was a mystery. And because it was a mystery, you were curious about it. Well, what is this? Well, Han Solo, it's just some hokey old religion. I believe in my blaster, and that's about it.
I'll
So,
go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, you had every side of the coin. You had, sure, majority of people think it's just this hokey old religion, or you have the Moffs who say, yo, religion has failed you, Darth Vader, and it has no power. We are now the ultimate power. So you kind of have the old system and the new system at war with one another. You have science and faith that are in competition with one another, and yet you have individuals like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker and Yoda. Yes, it's a technological age. It is a very advanced age, but there is still room for the unknown. There's still room for faith. There's still room for belief. And it's very powerful.
It is. And let's just address the elephant in the room as to why we really love Star Wars. It had strong female characters and it had people of color.
I can agree with that. It did.
And I will say, joking aside, I loved the character of Leia. I had never really seen a female character like that before. She was kind of the damsel in distress in the first movie until she gets rescued, and then
Uh,
she's like, "Give me that blaster," and she shoots open the door to the trash compactor, and she's like, "Down here," she kind of takes charge. She's sassy. That's gotten way out of hand in media, but at the time it was funny. And then of course Lando, the smooth talking ladies man. Well, L337 wasn't around at that time, but he
we
was a
let's
great.
let's not speak of the Disney Star Wars just yet. We're keeping this pure right now.
It's hard. It's hard. Yeah, but they were great characters, and it didn't matter if they were female or black or what their race or gender was. They were great characters, and they were written well. And George had enough people around him uh, to make something truly great. I mean, aside from Nien Nunb, there's not a bad character in Star Wars. I mean, oh, okay, Jar Jar Binks. I guess we're including prequels in this. I was thinking OT, but in the OT they were extremely well written. Even though 3PO was extremely annoying, he was funny, and you did get a lot of humor out of the way people reacted to him.
Well, and I think with C3PO too, it helps offset that, like you said, the humor, but it gives him the counterpart for R2D2. You kind of have this almost like Abbott and Costello kind of thing going on with them.
That's a good analogy. Yeah.
And from a storytelling perspective, having C3PO saying there as a foil, he's explaining to the audience, well, the chances of this of going through are only 3 in 5,200, and never tell me the odds.
Yeah.
So by having C3PO there, yeah, he is annoying, but he is giving you pretty much almost what your non-adventurous audience member might be thinking at any one time. Why are we going in this direction? We could go in any direction. Well, fine. You go in your direction. I'll go in this direction.
Yeah.
So it inserts a possible aspect of the audience's opinion into any scene that he's there. And the fact that it annoys you, well, kind of is indicative of the fact that you prefer the fantasy over the reality.
That's an interesting take on things. Yeah, he is kind of the quintessential prude, the proper gentleman, if you will.
He's the Bilbo Baggins who did not go on the adventure.
Yeah, that's what Bilbo would have turned into had he been. Yeah.
Yeah, but that of course is Lord of the Rings, not Star Wars. Speaking of Jar Jar Binks gets a lot of hate from people who've seen the prequel series, and a lot of people say that one of the only problems with the prequel series was Jar Jar Binks. As you both know, I have a theory that Jar Jar Binks was kind of almost kind of a heat sink, a red herring for negative emotions. I think that a lot of people focused on how annoying Jar Jar was to cover up some of the weaker aspects of, in particular, the Phantom Menace. What are your thoughts?
PorgLord.
I don't know. I just my hate is so strong for Jar Jar that it does kind of put blinders on me. Um, that it helps take away from a lot of the other questionable or lacking dialogue, or you may say in the movies. It's just like like Draco says, it's just it's a heat sink. It's hey, look over here, look at this. Don't mind all of the bad stuff going on over there.
Yeah, he told me this theory a while back, and I think we were discussing. Correct me if I'm wrong. We were talking about the plot, Draco, and how
Well,
many holes are in it, and how it makes no sense.
we had been talking about that. We had been talking about a few of the different things. If you consider, in episode one, the Phantom Menace is the first time where they actively used a lightsaber to cut through a say like a bulkhead or a door on a spaceship. And even though Qui-Gon Jinn's face is right up against that bulkhead as he's rotating his lightsaber in it, the radiant energy is not flash firing his beard because it's got force protection, I suppose. It's an amazing image, but in reality, if this metal door is melting apart, then it's going to be running over his shoes, it's going to be igniting his beard, it's going to be setting his hair on fire, but these are problems we did not look at because Misa Jaja Binks, Misa ya humble seven.
Please don't do that again.
I will not do that again.
Let's keep. I thought we were going to keep this clean.
Well, we're keeping it pure of Disney influence is what we're doing.
Yeah, but when you talk like that, I'm going to use profanity.
All right, well then
I
we'll
don't want to
reserve
use
that.
profanity.
We'll reserve that for an after hours video. All right.
Um, it's funny though, because once you finish watching the Phantom Menace, all you can think about is, God, I thought I was gonna like it this time, but Jar Jar's worse than ever. And yeah, you don't think about the non beard burning and things that are going on in the plot. I mean, would you agree that you can just kind of throw that one out and in um the whole mix of things, like, is the Phantom Menace really necessary to the Skywalker story?
PorgLord?
Uh, I don't necessarily know that it is. I mean, it seems like they do kind of like go back and try to rehash some of the stories or information that you've been given, um, or in the OTs, or I mean, I guess even reading some of the old EU. I mean, there were a number of books out at that point too, where they have mentioned Anakin's kind of background. Um, so I don't necessarily know. I mean, I guess if you hadn't read the EU, if you were just, a casual viewer, you probably would need them so you kind of know what's going on. But it does give you kind of an uncomfortable feeling, especially knowing the interactions of what's going on with Padme and Anakin, especially in the later movies.
Yeah, I agree. It makes it so weird when she says, "You'll always be that little boy I met on Tatooine." I
What,
mean,
the 10-year-old that was macking on a 16-year-old?
yeah, I mean, it's just creepy. And the fact, I don't know if this bothers anyone else, but for me, it really aggravates me that 3PO was built by Anakin. Anyone else?
Yeah, that was super convenient, lazy writing, you could say.
If Anakin built C-3PO, then I in hindsight, in seeing the different Clone Wars and everything that's gone on, Luke has a not Luke. Anakin has a lot of loyalty towards R2D2. and it's brought up in the Clone Wars that he's intentionally never wiped R2D2's brain because he's more useful this way, even though there's a threat that R2 could be taken by the separatist armies and that they can learn all the secrets of the Republic through R2D2. But he has zero respect or loyalty whatsoever to R2 to C3PO
Whom he built.
from scratch. Yes.
Yeah, and it's weird. You talked about the clone. There's a Clone Wars episode where R2 basically gets blown out into space, and Anakin wants to go retrieve him, and Obi-Wan says, he's a machine. You have an unhealthy attachment to a machine, Anakin." And they, of course, find a way to retrieve him because he has pertinent information stored on him. Well, because his mind wasn't wiped, as you brought up earlier, and so they end up retrieving him. But his attachment was extremely strong to R2, but despite building 3PO, he gave him to Padme and just threw him to the wolves.
Well, I don't know if you could consider Padme the wolves, but I would say that for me,
Hey, I'm sorry, cougar.
Oh, fair enough. I would say though that in the regarding the Phantom Menace, you ask, can it just be thrown away? I would say no. I would say that there is something important in the Phantom Menace, and it's not Anakin was a slave. It's not Anakin's mom. It's not Anakin meeting Padme. It's not Padme being a queen. It's not even the awesomeness of Qui-Gon Jinn and how he died to Darth Maul. It's the origin of Darth Sidious.
Yeah, I mean that really is Sidious's story almost as much or more than Anakin's in that trilogy, and seeing his rise to power was, I think, one of the stronger parts of the prequel trilogy.
It was, in fact, after the vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum in Episode 1, he doesn't want to have anything to do with Padme. He doesn't want her going back. He wants to use her as a pawn. But if she's going to go back, we'll let these things happen. He had no way of anticipating the influence of a 10-year-old pilot who says, "Let's try spins. That'll work," and defeats the Armada.
Yeah, I think you mentioned Darth Maul also, and I have to say, when you hear that music, that dun 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 dun, dun and that fight, whether you need that story in the over arc of the main saga or not, that scene is iconic, and of course he plays a major role later. But I will say I do love that fight scene. It may be my favorite lightsaber battle in the entire in all 8 movies now. PorgLord?
I don't know if I would go. It's up there. It was good, and Duel of Fates is become iconic music for the entire series. Up there with the main theme. I would say more the lightsaber duel between Anakin and ObiWan in Revenge of the Sith is probably, to me, the best lightsaber battle of all the movies. I think they tried to do real good with that one with Darth Maul and Qui-Gon, but just going back and watching it a few times later on, having some people point out some things on it, it's just it is too over choreographed, I guess I should say. It felt a little too rehearsed if you go back and watch some of it. I mean, it is still one of the better lightsaber battles in the series, but I don't know if I'd go and say as far as say the best.
Well, right? I do have to say, comparing those two lightsaber battles, it's an interesting way to compare the end, because at the end of the Revenge of the Sith, Episode 3, you have Obi-Wan on the hillside. You have Anakin floating on the droid above the lava, and Obi-Wan says, "Don't do it, Anakin. I have the high ground. Because I have the advantage. I'm gonna beat you." And Anakin doesn't care. Honey Badger doesn't care. He flings himself through the air, loses his legs and all but one arm. I guess it was the mechanical arm, and is left to die in a volcano. Whereas you have in the episode 1 battle, you have Obi-Wan is hanging off of the edge of an outcropping in a pit with Darth Maul standing over him. I would say Darth Maul has the high ground in this situation. But no, Obi-Wan flings himself up, and whereas Darth Maul, all he had to do was twirl his double-ended lightsaber in front of him, Obi-Wan is able to leap over him, flip over him, land behind, snatch up a force grab his lightsaber from where it had landed, and then cut Darth Maul in half. So I don't know if Darth Maul was suffering from extreme latency that day, or what was going on. But again, these are one of the plot things that we didn't notice at the time because of how much we despised Jar Jar Binks.
Now, I will say that the end result of the two battles, the winner goes to Revenge of the Sith. But for me, the Revenge of the Sith lightsaber battle got a little overdone. I mean, they're standing on rocks, floating down the lava. There's just so many things that happen that got me out of the moment just due to the extreme nature of the battle sequence. It was just a little overdone for me, but it was still great, and the implications and the weight it has at the end of it is extremely powerful. However,
All right, I would like to ask before we start winding down. I know that Star Wars was very impactful to each of us in our youth and as we grew up. Um, I'll start with you, Porg. What part of Star Wars has stuck with you the most since that time?
I think it's the stories that they were able to tell, and the characters that you get to meet. Especially reading like the old EU books. You in a lot of stories you tend to have your stereotypical or just typical characters or type of characters, and just in Star Wars being able to become such a large universe, you were just able to introduce so many kind of atypical characters and personalities and stories. It's just like, if you wanted to read about, spaceship battles, there were stories that books you could go read about that. If you wanted to read about the lightsaber battles, if you were all about the Jedi and the Sith, there were books that you could go read, different stories within that universe that you could go read just about that. So it was just, you just had a lot, it was endless amounts of possibilities that, you could go explore. They were always, trying to introduce, new characters and new settings. It just didn't become very tripe where, it was like, oh, here's so and so again, always getting into this, kind of the same situation all the time. I mean, they tend to follow the kind of the same general guideline, but at least, to me, it was always something new, new worlds and new characters.
Understood. Taurus, what about you, sir?
what sticks with me the most is just like I mentioned earlier, the blending of sci-fi and fantasy, and doing it so well. You have adventure, you have space battles, and you have this mystical religion blended in with it. It was just so tastefully done and so different from anything I had ever seen at that point or have seen up until this point. And I just never seen anything like that. And adventures are fun, man. As a kid, as an adult, Indiana Jones is fun, but it's rooted in our planet, in our mythology. But these were in a galaxy far, far away. These were places that you could never go. In different systems and planets and ships, and just the majesty and magic of it all has stuck with me since I was 3 or 4 years old when I saw A New Hope for the first time.
That's awesome. For me, the thing that honestly that has stuck with me the most has been the cooperative atmosphere that the different creators in the universe have had with one another. Everyone has always hailed that George Lucas, he was the man, and he set the rules, he set the setting. Work within George's sandbox, but don't break the sandbox. And towards that point, you've had movies, you've had books, you've had video games, and all of them have, for the most part, worked along with each other and worked to build up a certain rule set of things that happen in this world, things that are possible in this world. Science fiction is built on the predication that a large part of what you're seeing is based in science, is based in rules that apply to our own reality. And what makes the fiction of it so special is where they break those rules, where they have aliens, where they have people who breathe underwater, where they have people who can survive for, say, a few minutes outside of space, outside in space, so long as they have a breather. I'm talking about Clone Wars. I'm not talking about the other scene. Just to clarify there. Um, but you had everyone working together, um, towards a cohesive environment. No one's challenging each other or saying, well, suddenly the rules that worked here are completely different anymore. Um, and as long as you were willing to play by the rules, everyone's welcome. You can have your video games, you can have Rogue Squadron, you can have your Star Wars: The Force Awakens, you can have your Knights of the Old Republic, you can have your extended universe books, and so long as no one's breaking the sandbox, everyone got along, and that has stuck with me as perhaps the most ideal situation you can have. Everyone working together to build the property, to build the build the universe instead of trying to tear it down, trying to change it completely into something else.
And that is truly amazing that that has was allowed to go on for so long. And not reading the EU myself, I know people like PorgLord and other friends who just found so much additional content that they could go to and enjoy, and found their own iconic moments and iconic characters. I mean, you think about Admiral Thrawn. I've known about Admiral Thrawn for years and years and years, and knew how popular he was. Now, I hadn't actually read the Thrawn books, but he's considered one of the most popular Star Wars characters. Mara Jade, same thing. And those come from the sandbox and come from additional creators that played in that sandbox, and they're as beloved as some of the OT characters.
PorgLord, do you have anything to add to that, sir?
No, I mean, yeah, I would agree with what you said. Like, and like Taurus said, you had Thrawn come out of there. I mean, one of my favorite Star Wars character was, a Jedi introduced in the EU, Corran Horn. And like you said, I mean, it was an interesting process to watch. A lot of these different authors, be given trust of all of these different characters, and still be able to write the story that they want within the universe, and like you said, not break the rules. And able to kind of almost give that character a little bit of piece, of their own personality, as they were writing it.
So it almost seems like it was a property that has always been owned by the fan base, that everyone who's contributed to it has been a fan of the property.
Yeah, I believe you could easily say that.
All right, well, do either of you have anything you'd like to add towards this Why We Love Star Wars video?
Org.
Not that I can think of.
Taurus?
There's a lot of things I'd like to say, but we're trying to keep this as Lucas's vision. Just in closing, me so many years of enjoyment. Yeah, the prequels are with Anakin and Padme's love scenes. Heck, when I showed my son the entire series for the first time, he had to fast forward through those scenes. He was like, "Dad, can we move on with this? I don't want to see this." And in all fairness, I didn't either. So I was grateful. But regardless, the prequels expanded the universe that we learned about in the OT. The OT was made better by the prequels, in my opinion, despite the fact that they weren't extremely great films. They still added to the mythology and expanded Star Wars.
Awesome. Awesome. And of course, for me, um, uh, it seems so long as it always seemed to me that Star Wars was the most inclusive property that there was. If you were a Star Trek nerd, you had to have the uniform or you had to have the Klingon ridges. You had to be very much invested in a property to be accepted as a fan. Whereas if you're a Star Wars fan, your level of activity in the property was not as important as how genuine your feelings were for it, and how much you valued the rule set, the sandbox, and did everything you could to promote it and share it with others.
Yeah, it's an amazing piece of work. Combined when you step back and look at it, all the films, the video games, the EU stories, and I can't think of anything in entertainment that even comes close to doing what George Lucas did with Star Wars.
I'd agree. And so I think that concludes our discussion on why we love Star Wars. Um, of course, this discussion will have a follow up discussion based on the fact that all the information that we provided today was in regards to the original series, episodes 4, 5, and 6, and the prequels 1, 2, and 3. Of course, everything that followed came after George Lucas made his $4 billion deal with the corporation everyone fondly refers to as Disney. And what follows belongs in another video. This has been the Legacy Guard. We thank you for listening.